The unbreakable signal. The Galactic Council had seen empires rise and fall across 10,000 years. They had witnessed species ascend to technological marvels and others collapse into dust. But never, in all their recorded history, had they encountered anything quite like humanity. The humans were young, reckless, and impossibly stubborn. They had barely mastered faster-than-light travel when they stumbled into the wider galaxy, their ships held together with what the elder races could only describe as optimistic engineering and sheer willpower. Ambassador Velrith of the Corthan Dominion stood before the council chamber's central display, his 4 eyes narrowing as he reviewed the latest reports from human space. The holographic projection showed a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, surrounded by a network of primitive satellites and space stations. Earth. The humans called it Earth, and they defended it with a ferocity that bordered on madness. 3 cycles ago, the Varath swarm had begun their expansion into the Outer Rim territories. The swarm consumed everything in their path, biological matter and technology alike, leaving behind nothing but barren rocks and silence. 67 species had fallen before them. Worlds that had stood for millennia were reduced to cosmic graveyards in mere rotations. The Council had issued evacuation orders across the entire sector, warning all civilizations to flee before the unstoppable tide. The humans had refused. Velrith remembered the transmission clearly. A single human, a young female with dark skin and determined eyes, had appeared on every council frequency simultaneously. She had introduced herself as Commander Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force, and her message had been brief and impossible. Earth would not evacuate. Earth would not surrender. Earth would stand, and they would fight. The Council had dismissed it as the final defiance of a doomed species. They had seen it before, that last desperate spark of pride before extinction. They had mourned humanity in advance and turned their attention to salvaging what they could from the other endangered worlds. But then something unexpected happened. The swarm reached Earth's solar system, and the humans did not die. The first wave of swarm vessels entered human space like a dark tsunami, their bioorganic hulls pulsing with malevolent hunger. There were thousands of them, each one capable of cracking a planet's crust and devouring its core. The Council's long-range sensors watched, recording what they believed would be humanity's final moments. Instead, they witnessed something that would be debated in academic circles for generations to come. The humans had prepared, not with the advanced energy shields of the Corthan, not with the quantum weapons of the Solarix Collective, but with something far more primitive and infinitely more terrifying. They had turned their entire solar system into a weapon. Every asteroid had been seeded with explosives. Every moon had been hollowed out and filled with kinetic launch systems. Even their own space stations had been rigged to detonate, sacrificing themselves to create debris fields that would shred incoming vessels. And they had done it all in less than 3 cycles. The swarm hit Earth's defensive perimeter like a hammer striking a hornet's nest. Explosions rippled through space as human weapons, crude but devastatingly effective, tore into the bioships. Kinetic projectiles, accelerated to relativistic speeds, punched through swarm armor that had withstood plasma cannons and graviton beams. Nuclear warheads, technology most civilized species had abandoned millennia ago, detonated in calculated patterns that turned the void into a burning graveyard. But the swarm was vast, and the humans were few. For every swarm vessel destroyed, 10 more pushed forward. The defensive ring began to collapse, and still the humans fought. Their ships, small and fragile compared to Council dreadnoughts, darted through the chaos like angry wasps, targeting weak points with suicidal precision. Velrith watched as human pilots deliberately rammed their vessels into swarm carriers, their final transmissions nothing more than defiant war cries. Then came the signal. It started as a pulse, a rhythmic beat that cut through every communication frequency in the sector. At first, the Council thought it was interference, some side effect of the massive battle raging around Earth. But as the signal strengthened, they realized it was deliberate. It was a message broadcast in every known language and several that weren't, repeating over and over with unwavering intensity. We are humanity. We do not break. We do not yield. Come and face us. The signal shouldn't have mattered. It was just noise, just the final scream of a dying species. But something about it, something in its relentless rhythm and absolute certainty, began to affect the swarm. The bioships, driven by a hive intelligence that had consumed galaxies, started to hesitate. Their attack patterns became erratic, confused. It was as if the signal itself was a weapon that attacked not ships or shields, but will itself. Velrith leaned closer to the display, his diplomatic composure cracking. The humans had discovered something that even the ancient races had never considered. They had found a way to weaponize their most fundamental trait, the one thing that defined them above all else, not their technology, not their strength, but their absolute refusal to accept defeat. The battle raged on, and the signal grew stronger, pulsing like a heartbeat that refused to stop. And across the galaxy, other species began to listen, to wonder, and to hope. The echo of defiance. The signal had been broadcasting for 17 standard hours, and its effects were spreading far beyond Earth's solar system. In the Council's emergency assembly hall, representatives from 400 species watched in stunned silence as their instruments picked up something impossible. The human signal was not just audible anymore. It was resonating, rippling through subspace like a stone thrown into still water, touching frequencies that should have been unreachable by such primitive technology. Ambassador Velrith stood among them, his attention fixed on Commander Chen's face in the holographic display. She looked exhausted, her uniform torn and stained with something dark, but her eyes burned with an intensity that made even the most battle-hardened council members uncomfortable. Behind her, through the viewscreen of her command station, Earth hung in space like a blue jewel surrounded by fire and wreckage. The swarm had pushed through the outer defenses. They were now engaging human forces at the orbital ring, and still the signal pulsed. A Solarix admiral, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns, turned to address the council. His voice carried the weight of military experience spanning 3,000 years. He had fought in the border wars, survived the collapse of the Tertian Empire, and commanded fleets that had defended entire sectors. When he spoke, others listened. "What we are witnessing defies conventional understanding," he said, his tone mixing curiosity with something that might have been fear. "The swarm operates on pheromone networks and bioelectric impulses. They do not hear in the traditional sense. They should not be affected by an audio transmission, no matter how powerful. Yet the data is undeniable. Their coordination is breaking down. Individual bioships are separating from the hive pattern, making decisions that contradict the collective intelligence. Some have even begun retreating." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Retreat was not a concept associated with the Varath swarm. They consumed or they died. There was no middle ground, no negotiation, no withdrawal. Entire task forces had thrown themselves against swarm armadas, achieving nothing but their own destruction. Yet here, against a species barely a century into space travel, the impossible was happening. Velrith accessed his personal datapad, reviewing reports from Council observers stationed at the edge of the conflict zone. What he read made his blood run cold and hot simultaneously. The signal was not just sound. Human scientists, working with equipment that the elder races would have considered museum pieces, had somehow managed to embed quantum markers into the transmission. Every pulse carried encoded information that interfaced directly with neural patterns, bypassing physical hearing entirely and striking at something deeper:
consciousness itself. And the message within those pulses was pure, distilled human emotion, not fear, as one might expect from a species facing extinction, not desperation or plea for mercy. It was rage and hope intertwined, bound together with something the analytical council minds struggled to quantify: determination, the absolute certainty that surrender was not an option, that death was preferable to submission, that even if they fell, they would fall fighting. The swarm, for all its power and hunger, had never encountered that before.
On Earth, Commander Chen gripped the railing of her command platform as another explosion rocked the station. The orbital defense grid was failing. Swarm bioships, massive living vessels the size of mountains, were pushing through the debris field toward the planet's atmosphere. Human frigates, tiny by comparison, swarmed around them like angry insects, their weapons carving chunks from the organic armor, but unable to stop the advance. Chen's tactical officer, a young man named Marcus, whose hands shook as he worked his console, called out updates in a voice he fought to keep steady. Evacuation shuttles were launching from every major city, carrying civilians to underground bunkers that might or might not survive what was coming. The lunar bases had gone dark 20 minutes ago. The Mars colonies had stopped responding entirely. But the signal kept broadcasting. Chen had not slept since the swarm arrived. She had not eaten in 14 hours. Her second-in-command had been killed when a swarm fighter pierced the station's hull, and half her bridge crew was operating on emergency medical stimulants. None of that mattered. The signal was all that mattered now. It was humanity's voice, screaming into the void that they existed, they mattered, and they would not be forgotten. Her communications officer, an older woman named Rodriguez, with silver streaking through her dark hair, suddenly straightened at her station. Her eyes widened as she cycled through frequencies, checking and rechecking her instruments. When she spoke, her voice cracked with something between disbelief and wild hope. "Commander, we're receiving responses. Multiple responses. The signal is being answered." Chen spun toward her, ignoring the pain that lanced through her injured shoulder. "From whom? The Council?" Rodriguez shook her head, tears streaming down her face as she routed the incoming transmissions to the main display. "From everyone. The Corthon Dominion has dispatched their third fleet. The Solarix Collective is mobilizing combat crystals. Even the Theron Compact, they've been isolated for 2 centuries. They're opening their borders and sending ships. Commander, they heard us. The whole galaxy heard us, and they're coming." The display lit up with dozens, then hundreds of transponder signals. Ships were entering the sector from every direction, vessels bearing the colors and markings of species that had barely spoken to each other in generations. Ancient rivals were flying side by side, their weapons charging not against each other, but toward the common enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for so long. Chen felt something break inside her chest, but it was not despair. It was the opposite. She activated her command channel, her voice broadcasting across every human frequency and beyond, carried by the signal that had started this impossible moment. "All human forces, this is Commander Chen of Earth Defense. Reinforcements are inbound. I repeat, we are not alone. Hold the Latin, fight for every second. Show them what humanity means." Across Earth's orbit, battered and bleeding human crews heard her words and responded. Ships that should have been abandoned stayed in the fight. Weapons that had been firing on emergency power found new energy, and the signal, that relentless pulse of human will, grew stronger still. In the council chamber, Velrith watched it all unfold and understood something profound. Humanity had not just saved themselves. They had reminded the galaxy what it meant to refuse defeat. They had shown that strength was not always measured in advanced technology or ancient wisdom, but in the simple, stubborn insistence that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The swarm was no longer advancing. They were surrounded, confused, and for the first time in their existence, afraid. The turning tide. The reinforcements arrived like a tidal wave of light and fury. Corthon dreadnoughts, their hulls gleaming with energy shields that could withstand stellar radiation, materialized from faster-than-light jumps in perfect formation.
Solarix combat crystals, living constructs of pure silicate intelligence, refracted deadly laser arrays across the battlefield. Even the mysterious Theron vessels, ships that seemed to phase between dimensions, joined the growing armada that now surrounded Earth's solar system. Commander Chen watched from her damaged command station as the fleet roster continued to grow. 300 ships, 500, 1,000. Species that had maintained cold neutrality for centuries were now broadcasting solidarity messages on human frequencies. The Veroth swarm, which had seemed unstoppable mere hours ago, suddenly found itself facing not a lone, primitive world, but the combined might of the galactic community. And at the center of it all, the signal kept pulsing. Ambassador Velrith had transported directly to Earth's orbital platform, something that violated a dozen diplomatic protocols, but seemed insignificant now. He stood beside Commander Chen, his four eyes taking in the chaos of the human command center. Crew members rushed between stations, some with visible injuries they ignored, all of them working with desperate efficiency. The walls were scarred with blast damage, and the air smelled of smoke and recycled oxygen pushed beyond its limits. But nobody was running. Nobody had given up. Chand acknowledged his presence with a brief nod, never taking her eyes from the tactical display. The combined fleet was engaging the swarm's main force, and the battle had shifted from Earth's immediate orbit to the outer system. Human ships, damaged but still fighting, were regrouping and linking up with their new allies. The sight of a human frigate flying wing to wing with a Korthon battlecruiser would have been unthinkable a day ago. "Your people surprised us, Commander," Velrith said quietly, his translator rendering his words in perfect English. "The Council believed humanity would fall in hours. We prepared memorial archives. We recorded your final messages for preservation. We thought we were witnessing an extinction." Chen finally looked at him, and he saw something in her expression that made him understand why the galaxy had responded. Not arrogance or bravado, but a simple, unshakable truth. "We don't know how to quit, Ambassador. It's not in our nature. You can kill us, break our ships, destroy our worlds, but you can't make us stop fighting for what matters. And apparently that means something out here." A proximity alarm interrupted them. One of the massive swarm bioships had broken through the defensive line and was making a desperate run toward Earth. It was wounded, leaking biological fluids that froze instantly in the vacuum, but still dangerous, still capable of unleashing devastation on the planet below. Chen's tactical officer called out intercept solutions, but they all showed the same result. No human ship could reach it in time. The orbital defense platforms were depleted, their ammunition exhausted from hours of continuous firing. Earth's last line of defense had nothing left to give. Velrith watched Chen's face, expecting to see despair finally break through. Instead, he saw calculation. She opened a channel to the approaching Allied fleet, her voice calm despite the crisis. "All vessels, this is Commander Chen of Earth Defense. We have a swarm bioship on terminal approach to our homeworld. I'm transmitting its trajectory now. If any ship has firing solutions, we need them immediately." The response came from not one vessel, but from dozens. Ships from across the galaxy, species that moments ago had been strangers to humanity, all transmitted the same message in their various languages. "We have the shot. Hold position. Protect your world." The space around the descending bioship erupted in coordinated fire. Korthon plasma cannons, Solarix laser arrays, Theron phase disruptors, and weapons from 100 other species converged on the target with precision that spoke of centuries of military expertise. The bioship, massive and terrifying, was torn apart in seconds. Its fragments burned up in Earth's atmosphere, creating shooting stars that people in the shelters below would later call a sign of hope. Chen's communications officer, Rodriguez, was openly crying now as messages flooded in from across the system. The swarm's advance had collapsed completely. Individual bioships were attempting to flee, but the combined fleet was pursuing with merciless efficiency. What had been humanity's desperate last stand had transformed into a decisive victory. And the signal that had started it all was now being broadcast by ships from every species present. "We are humanity. We do not break, we do not yield, and we are not alone." The battle lasted another 3 hours, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. The swarm, which had consumed 67 civilizations, was broken against Earth's determination and the unity it had inspired. Survivors would later report that the swarm's hive intelligence had fragmented, unable to process the concept of collective resistance from species it considered inferior and divided. When the last swarm vessel was destroyed or driven into retreat, an unexpected silence fell over the fleet. Then slowly, one ship began broadcasting a simple tone. Another joined it, then another. Within minutes, the entire armada was transmitting in perfect synchronization, creating a harmony that had never existed in galactic history. Different species, different technologies, different voices, all united in one message. In the council chamber, which had remained an emergency session throughout the battle, the representatives stood in recognition of what had occurred. The ancient Solarix admiral approached the central podium, his crystal form chiming softly as he moved. When he spoke, his words were transmitted across the entire sector.
The Council acknowledges the species known as humanity, not as primitives who stumbled into our space, not as children requiring guidance, but as equals who have taught us a lesson we had forgotten. Strength is not measured only in years or technology. It is measured in the courage to stand when standing seems impossible, and in the ability to inspire others to stand with you. Commander Chen, exhausted beyond measure, managed to smile. Around her, her crew erupted in celebration, their joy mixing with relief and grief for those they had lost. Velrith placed one of his 4 hands on her shoulder, a gesture of respect in his culture. Your species will never be forgotten, Commander. Today you did more than survive. You changed the galaxy. Chen looked out at the stars, at the fleet that had come to humanity's defense, at Earth hanging peaceful and blue below. The signal was finally powering down, its work complete. But its echo would continue forever, a reminder to every species that had heard it, a reminder that sometimes the youngest voice could speak the loudest truth, that together nothing was impossible, and that humanity, for all their rough edges and reckless courage, had earned their place among the stars not through conquest or superiority, but through the simple, powerful act of refusing to surrender when surrender seemed inevitable. The galaxy had been changed, and there was no going back.